Hi everyone, welcome. This is Dennis Monokroussos again, and I'm presenting my second show now with chessvideos.tv. And last time we took a look at a couple of games that were themed exploiting the uncastled king. And in both of those games, there were certain preconditions that were such that one, I think, who is kind of aware of them, becomes inclined to look for some way to go after the enemy king. So in the first game against Di Mazzana, we saw that the white king was vulnerable on the a5 to e1 diagonal. And that once we were aware of that idea, we saw, okay, play queen a5 and bishop to b4, and the white king just had all kinds of troubles. In the second game, the Smith-Morra game, we saw that the open e-file in white's lead in development really made the black king terribly vulnerable, and the question there really was just, how do we keep the black king in the center? How do we prevent him from running off and castling? All right, but in both cases, it was fairly clear that the black king, or not the black king, but the weaker side's king was vulnerable, and that we really needed to figure out how to go after it. Well, sometimes the king that's uncastled is vulnerable, but that vulnerability shows up along the way. So it's not that it's the end in itself. It's not that we're necessarily going headhunting, but that we see some other idea, and in the process of pursuing that idea, the enemy king, stuck in the center as it is, comes a cropper, as a friend of mine likes to say. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. So it's a game where the mere fact that the king is uncastled proves to be its undoing, but the path there is kind of en passant. So it's that we're looking for other objectives, and it just turns out along the way that that becomes the difficulty. A point I wanted to bring up, so I forgot to mention this earlier in the broadcast, but I read a lot of the feedback. Well, read all the feedback that I saw on the chessvideos.tv website, and also a lot of people on my blog talked about the show and in positive ways. So I definitely appreciated the comments, and it was nice that they were positive. But if you have suggestions too, I'm open to hearing them. So if you have, in particular, topics that you think you might like to hear in subsequent shows, that would be just great if you wanted to share that with me. Okay, so on to this game, and maybe we'll have time for a second one, depending on how smoothly the first game we look at goes. So this game was played against Eric Cook, who's about a 2300 player, pretty stable 2300 player who lives in the New York area. And this was played in a Game 25 tournament at the Manhattan Chess Club back in 1998. So I had white, and I played d4, which is a little bit unusual for me, but in the 90s I played this with some regularity, and off and on also in the late 80s. I haven't played it in a while, but you never know. I could always return to it. It's simply, to some extent, I think all of us, if we've been playing long enough, we get tired of one opening or one set of openings, and you just want to switch around. So d4 gives you obviously very different kinds of positions. So it's kind of healthy to switch around. You learn more about the game, and it also benefits your play with the other colors. So if you always face d4 or you face d4 a lot, and you're looking for ideas for meeting it, well, play d4 and see what other people do against you. All right, well, in any case, I played d4 in this game. Cook played knight f6. And here he's offering to go into some kind of Benoni or Benko gambit. And I faced that, and d5 is, of course, the principled continuation. But on this occasion, I really wasn't in the mood for it, and I just decided I would play the simple e3. So kind of a ready-to-go setup, heading for probably a semi-Tarish or a possible Nimzo-Indian or Caro-Kann, depending on what black does. So you say, a Caro-Kann, how is that going to work? Well, if black takes on d4, and I recapture, and black plays d5, knight c3, and there you are. This is a transposition to the Painov-Botvinnik attack against the Caro-Kann. So there are various transpositional possibilities like this that are available. My mouse is being a little bit ornery here, so excuse me while I fiddle around with that. So okay, after c5, as I said, I played e3, and black played e6. So for his part, he's willing to go into a queen pawn opening. So this is going to turn, well, a double queen pawn opening. So this is going to turn into a queen's gambit family opening here. I played knight f3, d5, knight c3, knight c6. All right, now here we start to engage, actually both of us start to engage in what's called the battle for, or the battle of the tempo. And the idea is that this bishop on f1, and in black's case the bishop on f8, we want to develop it, but I don't want to develop it right away, because if I develop it straight away, then black takes on c4 and I recapture, and it took me 2 moves to get my bishop from f1 to c4. So I'd like to do it in 1 move if I can. So I want to try to find something useful to play here and wait for him to make this capture on c4. So that way I can bring my bishop out in 1 shot. And black is going to do the exact same thing with this capture on c5. Alright, so let's see how this works. So I played a3 here. And now black has a choice. So what I'm hoping for, of course, is d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and this is going to give me a very good queen's gambit declined position. All right, another possibility for black is to take here, and again to take twice, and once again, this is a good queen's gambit declined position for me. I have the point of these arrows here is that this pawn on a3, so this pawn move on a3 is really a very useful multi-purpose move. So I mentioned that it was a useful waiting move when I played it here on move 6 instead of bringing the bishop out. Well, what makes it useful is that, for example, in a position like this, it prevents black from playing knight b4 to d5, which is a common thematic try here, or a very common thematic idea, blockading the pawn on d5. Well, blockading on d5 the pawn that's on d4. Secondly, it gives my bishop from c4 a flight square if it wants to stay on that diagonal. So if black were to play knight to a5, I could drop the bishop back to the very good a2 square. Okay, a third idea of this a3 move is that if black were to play, well, actually we'll see it later in the game, so we'll see it next move. So black played a6, so he's doing the exact same thing here. And now I could have, and probably objectively best, is to play d takes c5. And this shows the other idea of a3, that after bishop takes c5, I have b4. So while I'm giving up the battle of the tempo by just exchanging on c5 straight away, in a way I kind of get the tempo back with this quick b4. And, alright, this is just, it's a normal game. Black can play bishop to a7, he can play bishop to d6, and it's a theoretical position. Neither side has any real grounds for complaint. So it's just an ordinary position of, with all results possible. All right, so instead of that, I think I played inaccurately. I played bishop to d3. So I just gave up the battle for the tempo and just wanted to get on with my development here. So he took on c4. I recaptured. He played b5, bishop to a2. And now Cook continues to fight for his own version of the battle of the tempo. So he doesn't want to take on d4. I mean, he could do that. There's nothing wrong with this, but this gives me the kind of position that I was striving for. And I think I'm in pretty good shape here. I have, for one thing, very easy access to playing the move d5, so I can always liquidate my isolated pawn if I'm worried that it'll be a weakness. And just generally speaking, I mean, I think black's setup isn't at all the best against this Queen's Gambit accepted type of isolated pawn position. So I think his choice was better. He played bishop to b7. And here, again, I don't want to capture on c5 right away, but I also, I have to find something useful to do. So anyway, his idea, though, too, so by his waiting and not taking on d4, he also is trying to maybe keep in store the possibility of playing c4 at some point. So those are the three ways the pawn structure can be modified. He could take on d4, and we get that Queen's Gambit accepted kind of structure that I just showed here. Or I can take on c5, and then we have the symmetrical structure, which is going to occur eventually in this game. And then the third possibility is that he plays c4 at some point. And that would give him a nice advantage in space on the queen side, but there's the possible drawback that then I'll be able to play e4 because there won't be any pressure on my d pawn any longer. So with a pawn on c5, it hits the pawn on d4, which means that my pawn on e3 has to stay put, or at least it's a very strong, let's say, suggestion to me and to the pawn to stay put. But once the pawn goes to c4, taking away the pressure, well, then I can play e4. So that's just another very interesting possibility for down the road. But anyway, black played bishop to b7, and here I have to find something useful to do. I don't want to play d takes c5 because then it would be like I'm black here. I'll have given him a free move compared to my own development. So almost everything will be symmetrical. I mean, just to show you, I mean, kind of a worst case scenario here. So I play d takes c5. He plays bishop takes c5, b4, and I don't know, let's say he plays bishop to a7 here. If I were to play bishop to b2, it would be an exactly symmetrical position, but with black to move, because his bishop came out one move faster than mine did. Alright, so this is something that I, of course, want to avoid. So after he played bishop to b7, I castled. Now, he tries to find another useful move, so we're again doing this little battle of the tempo business here. He played queen to c7. I played queen to e2. And here, again, this is maybe his last chance. He could play c takes d4. But this would be, I think, a very good position for me once again. His queen is not really brilliantly placed on c7, so I can play bishop to g5 and then rook f to e1 and then put my rook either on d1 or on c1. And in both cases, I'm going to have some advantage. And again, I can always play d5 worst comes to worst, and that should give me a slight advantage as well. So he played more incisively. He played bishop to e7. All right, well, now that he's brought the bishop out, I can get my tempo back, and so I do. So I play d takes c5, bishop c5, b4. And now Cook introduces a little bit of asymmetry into the position with bishop to d6. So he doesn't go to a7, mimicking what I did, but plays bishop to d6 instead, taking aim at this pawn on h2. Now, it's covered at the moment, but there are tactical possibilities which we're about to see. So I played bishop to b2, completing my development, and protecting, this is important, my previously undefended knight on c3. All right, well now, if Cook just played castles kingside, he'd have a perfectly reasonable game. I mean, maybe I have some chances for a slight edge. I'd probably play rook a to c1 here. And again, my position's pretty comfortable, but the position is obviously very symmetrical, and it's difficult to get anything real out of the position. So I'll probably try something like bishop to b1, maybe knight to g5 with the idea of putting a knight on e4, the idea of getting rid of his knight on f6 and then having both of my bishops swooping across his king side. So that may be promising. Of course, black will be aware of this, and it'll just be an interesting fight, I think. But Cook was more ambitious, so after bishop to b2, he played the move knight to e5. And at least at first, this looks really very promising for black. So he's threatening to capture on f3. I mean, he's got both the knight on e5 and the bishop on b7 bearing down on my knight on f3. And first of all, the capture there will ruin my pawn structure. And secondly, then he's got this lineup on h2. And that's certainly all to his advantage as well. So this looks like it could be kind of awkward for me. But the thing is, okay, there are some drawbacks with his position as well. Get rid of some of this debris here. All right, so the first thing is this queen on c7 is a little bit exposed. So there could be places where I play rook a to c1, and he's got to worry about discoveries. Now, maybe that's not such a big deal, but it's at least a possible tactical motif that's in the air, something that he at least needs to be aware of. Secondly, he hasn't castled yet. Now, it's far from obvious how exactly I could exploit such a state of affairs, but it's there, and it's at least worth bearing that in mind. Okay, well, what do I do here? Well, in this position, I thought for quite a while. I mean, it was only a game 25, but I spent a reasonable amount of time, and I think I found a very, very nice idea that seemed to be pretty accurate. So it's about I think I looked about 7 moves ahead in the main line, which it's not tremendous, but I think it was a good and accurate bit of calculation in a semi-forcing position. So at any rate, we'll see the idea. So I played knight takes e5, which is what I would like to play, but the obvious problem is that there's this double attack now. So he's hitting my knight on c3 with two pieces. The bishop and the queen are both attacking it. And he's also attacking the pawn on h2. And there doesn't seem to be any way for me to save both of those units, so this looks a little bit problematic. Of course, I had seen this, but there's also an obvious move. So the most obvious move to play here is f4, with the point that after bishop takes c3, I have rook a to c1. So I can get my piece back, I get the bishop here, and at first it might look as if this could be pretty promising. But I think black just plays knight to e4, and now I have to play bishop to b1. So I have to get rid of the knight, which defends the bishop, so I can get my piece back. And now I think black plays queen to c4. So we trade queens, and then here I have to take the bishop on c3. And this just seems like a very, very difficult position for white to really achieve much of anything, because this knight on e4 is just a monster. And if white were to capture on e4, well, then we're going to end up with a bishops of opposite color position, and one where white really doesn't seem to have any initiative. So opposite color bishop endings, it's easy to overestimate how drawish they are. So in fact, there are many positions where having opposite color bishops is a tremendous advantage for the attacking side. But here, I think it's not going to be any advantage at all. So I really think white's choice is whether he wants to abide a very, very powerful knight on e4 or a very, very powerful bishop on e4. Either way, I think black's chances for equality are excellent. So that's f4 isn't really very promising. But fortunately, I had thought of a better idea, and it's to play rook a to c1. Now this is clearly threatening. In particular, I'm threatening knight takes b5 now, which would discover an attack on the queen. So it's not just that the knight attacks the queen, but the rook on c1 does as well. Okay, now he could try queen to b8. And then here I have a very pleasant choice between f4, which would just chase his bishop away, and then I can maybe play e4, and then everything is just terrific for white. So that's one possibility. A second interesting possibility is to play knight takes b5, though. All right, so now if black plays bishop takes b2, then I can interpolate knight to c7 check, and only next move, capture on b2. And then I'm winning a pawn, and his king is stuck in the middle, and everything is just great for white. Okay, so bishop takes b2 is not any good. Another possibility is just pawn takes the knight. But now I have queen takes pawn check with a double attack, so I'm hitting, of course, the queen, and it looks like I'm getting the bishop on e5. So black's only decent move here is knight to d7, but all the same I regain the piece with bishop takes e5. He has to play queen takes e5, and now I have queen takes b7. And I'm up a couple of pawns here, and black has no real compensation for this. So this is just a winning position for white. Okay, so after knight takes b5, we saw that bishop takes b2 isn't any good. We saw that a takes b5 isn't any good. So that leaves bishop takes h2 check. All right, well here king h1 is pretty easy to find since it's the only legal move. And now a takes b5, f4. And here we're threatening to take on h2. We've cut the line off from the queen to the bishop. And here, if black plays bishop to g3, I would play queen takes b5, and we'll actually see this later on in the game. So the other choice is to play bishop to e4, and okay, this protects the b5 pawn, but after I play king takes on h2, black castles, and rook to c5, white, well actually material is even, but white's bishop pair, and especially that bishop on b2, gives him a distinct advantage. So I'm threatening to take on b5, but rook to g5 is also quite a nice threat, and even bishop takes f6 is a possible concern for black. So this is a good position for white. It's not winning, but it's clearly better. Okay, so after rook a to c1, we just looked at queen to b8. Instead, Cook played the most testing move, bishop takes h2 check. All right, king h1. Interestingly, I just discovered when preparing this lecture that this position has actually occurred a couple of times in the databases, and I think let me see, one game was in 2000, the other game was in 1995. but it was with colors reversed. So, you know, again, my funny opening, I should have this position with black with colors reversed. But anyway, there too, the player that had Cook's side in my game was in trouble. So one game, the player that would have had black, given the colors in my game, lost, and the other game only drew because the guy offered to draw in a much better position. All right, so anyway, this is a very, very bad position for black, but it's not immediately clear why it's so bad. All right, well here black has three possible moves. There's bishop to d6, and this occurred in the 2000 game, actually between two players who I think are grandmasters. And there white played, of course, knight takes b5, and after queen to e7, knight takes d6 check. I mean, you can see that all of white's pieces are super active here, and just had a huge advantage. Should have won, but again, white, well, the player that had the equivalent of white in my game offered a draw in a much better position. But you can see, I mean, just to look at this position, that white's advantage is just is pretty stark. It's pretty clear. Okay, so bishop to d6, allowing knight takes b5 is no good. The second possibility is bishop to c6. Now this covers up the file and it shores up the b5 pawn a bit. So this actually looks like it's a good try. And to beat this requires really some beautiful play from white. And I don't know if I would have found this over the board. I'd like to think that I would have, but I don't know about that. So f4, okay, this move is pretty obvious. Black plays bishop to g3. And here I probably would have looked for some other solution. Maybe I would have thought of e4. Well, I can't play e4 because the f4 pawn hangs. But in any case, the right move here is the beautiful rook to f3. Now, the idea behind this is a very, very simple one. If the bishop moves to h4, there's rook to h3. But there's this obvious question. Also, white can play maybe e4. That's also pretty strong, too. But the obvious question is, well, why not just take the rook? And the answer is, well, queen takes f3, and there's a fork. Of course, notice, by the way, that this fork wouldn't exist if black had castled already, because the rooks would be connected. So rook to c8, more castles, and then queen takes g3, and white is just winning here. So material is technically even. Black has a rook and a pawn, and white has two bishops, but this is a position where the rooks really just don't matter at all. Black's king is still in quite a bit of danger. I mean, you can, and his queen is in danger, so there's still the threat of knight takes b5. If he tries something like castles, then knight takes b5. Well, let me think. Maybe not knight takes b5, because then this is okay. All right, so I take that one back. So after castles, probably just I don't know. Let's see. What should we do here? Maybe just knight to e4. Yeah, this looks pretty painful. So knight to e4, and we're threatening just to take on f6, and of course black can't do that because the queen takes g7 mate. And taking this just delays the inevitable. It's the same basic problem. King to h2, and you know, what does he do about the weakness of g7 and f6? If he tries knight to h5, we can play the kind of ironic knight to f6 check. If the king moves, we take the knight, and if knight takes, bishop. Oh, sorry, I just had an amazing hallucination. I was thinking I had a bishop on b2 there. So excuse my variation. All right, so this is all kind of crazy. Wow, nice bit of analysis there. So yeah, can't play knight to e4. Definite apologies. Okay, let's see if we can think of something that's actually sane here instead. Well, all right, probably the simplest move then is king to h2. So we won't be so clever here. So just king to h2, take time out, and now we are threatening all of those discovery tricks. Black should play something like queen. Well, even queen to e7 doesn't help because knight e4. And now, unlike my hallucination variation, there is queen takes g7 mate in the offing. You know, maybe black plays knight to h5. Can play queen to g4. And okay, so maybe Maybe this is not good for black, but it's tolerable. All right. So this is at least a sane variation, but generally speaking, so this idea with bishop takes f3, and after queen takes g3, white should be winning here, and it's just a matter of not coming up with excessively creative moves like I just did a moment ago. All right. Well, I'll try to avoid such hallucinations here in the future variations. Okay. So bishop takes f3 is not so great. So the other alternative is knight to h5. And here, white has another very nice move, knight to e4. Again, exploiting the pin on the c file. You notice how this is just the gift that keeps giving for white. This opposition of the white rook on c1 and the black queen on c7. Okay, so the knight on g4, on e4 now brings about a double attack on the bishop on g3. It, of course, covers the rook on f3, and also it uncovers the white bishop on b2. So it's a very nice multi-purpose move. So black's best looks like queen to e7, threatening queen to h4 check, which in fact would force mate in a couple more moves. So after the sequence, rook takes g3, with the point that if bishop takes e4, we have queen takes h5, and if queen to h4 check, I believe rook to h3 should work out all right. Black is just a tempo away. Well, actually, yeah. So again, there's a cute little tactic here. So things are not quite that simple. So after queen to h4 check, white has to play king to g1. And I think this is actually just going to transpose to my main line, though, most likely. So knight g3, queen g3, rook c6. And yeah, this transposes to the line that I was going to give. So after after rook takes g3, okay, my mouse is malfunctioning. Sorry about this. There we go. Rook takes g3, knight takes g3, knight g3, queen h4. So it's the exact same thing. King g1, queen takes g3, rook takes c6. Again, we end up with the situation where white's got the bishop pair for a rook and a pawn. And again, black's problem is that his rooks really aren't going to be effective anytime in the near future. And furthermore, after castles, rook c5 is pretty awkward with the threat of rook to g5. Of course, black can play h6, but again, just white's pieces are all super active. Black's rooks have no clear avenues, because white can play, for example, a move like bishop to d4, just clogging up all the files. Okay, so bishop to c6 is not really a solution either to black's problems. So Cook tried door number 3 and played queen to b8. So it just gets out of the way of the discovered attack possibilities, and is also maybe making room for his bishop to come back to c7 in some cases. Okay, well, I had foreseen this. That was the move that I expected, and now I played f4. So I'm cutting off this bishop on h2 from the rest of the board, really, from all of his friends on the opposite side of the board. All right, so he plays bishop to g3, which is forced, and now here's the key idea. So I'm trying to think, well, how do I get at this bishop on g3? I mean, it's sitting there. I'd sure like to get at it. Here, rook to f3 wouldn't make any sense. So this is another difference between queen to b8 versus bishop to c6. Now if I played the rook to f3, so I'll put it on the board, bishop f3, queen f3. Now because his queen is on b8, there's no attack on a8. His queen's got it covered. So here he can play bishop to h4, and on queen to h3, maybe, I don't feel entirely confident about this, but maybe he can get away with g5. But this is pretty iffy, given just how much lumber there is on this long diagonal. So it's questionable. Maybe I could play rook to f3 and get adequate compensation there too. But all right, even aside from that, I was trying to figure out, well, how do I get this bishop? And then I saw, okay, I have knight takes b5, and of course I saw this before, but the idea of this is, of course, there's a threat to play knight to c7 check, and that'll exploit his kings being uncastled. But there's also a couple of other ideas behind this move. So another idea is that I'm threatening to play maybe bishop takes f6, followed by queen of g4, and then I round up this bishop. Alright, so clearly the only good idea for him here is to take the knight. If he tried castling, then I get to show my idea perfectly. So knight to c7, might as well play rook to a7. Now I take on f6, and now queen of g4 check. I regain the bishop. I'm up a pawn. His king's position. Actually, I'm not up a pawn. Material is even, but his pawn structure is kind of cracked up. His king's position is vulnerable. His pieces on the queen side look a little bit funny. So I'm definitely very happy with my position here. So after knight takes b5, he took the knight, which is the principled continuation. I play queen takes b5 check. And here he could play king to f8. That wouldn't change the game too much. I play queen to c5 check. If he plays king to e8, I play bishop to c4. Oops, sorry, bishop to c4. And the threat of bishop to b5 check decides the game. He's got no defense to this. And after queen to c5 check, if he goes to g8, well, then I play queen to g5. I'm hitting the knight on f6 because of the pin. I'm hitting the bishop on g3. And he can save both pieces with knight to e4, but getting mated is even worse. So, after queen takes b5 check, black played king to e7. And it's a reasonable idea. I mean, what he's hoping is that he'll have time to play rook to d8 or maybe rook to c8, and then drop his king back to f8, and in effect castle by hand. So it's a very good idea. It just doesn't work out. But it's sometimes the good ideas aren't quite good enough to save a game. But I think it's a resourceful try. All right. Well, now I played queen to g5, and this is pretty much as far as I had calculated when I played rook a to c, or sorry, when I played knight takes e5. So from here, this whole thing is what I had calculated out. So 95. So all the way up to here. And so you can see I've got a lot of threats here. So I'm threatening to play, of course, I should also have the basic arrow for queen takes g3. So I'm hitting the bishop, and if I can take that, then great. I'm up a pawn. I'll have two hungry bishops, and he'll have an exposed king. So great for me. I'm also threatening the pawn on g7, which is quite good because then I'm hitting the knight on f6, and I've got pressure on the diagonal. I've also got the idea of playing bishop to e5, followed by the rook check on c7. So reminding him that his king is not in the best of shape either. So this is really a terrific looking position for me, and I just figured, well, gosh, I get here, I'm completely winning. But Cook found a nice move, rook to d8. And the point of this is that now if I take on g3, he plays rook to d2, and all of a sudden, gosh, he's got counterplay. So he's hitting g2 with both the rook and the bishop. He's hitting the bishop on b2, and even behind that, there's the bishop on a2. And here, I mean, I'm fortunate that I can even basically keep a roughly equal position if I went for this. So I can play bishop takes f6. If I play rook f2, I just lose immediately. He plays knight e4, forking my queen and rook. And if I play queen h4 check, he just plays g5, and I'm just completely dead here. This would be an absolute disaster. So after rook to f2, I have to play bishop takes f6. He takes, and now I have rook to f2. So that keeps everything just together. But still, he trades rooks and plays rook a3, and this is just a really messy position. So his rook is active, his bishop is active. On the other hand, his king is a bit exposed still, and my rook on c1 is pretty good. So it's just a very unclear position. But fortunately, I had a better move. So after rook to d8, I played bishop to e5. So this gets one of my pieces off the second rank, and that's a good thing. But more importantly, it chases his queen off into oblivion, and now I have rook to c7 check. And now I'm active, and all systems are go here. Now he could try king to f8, so this would be another little trappy move with the idea that if I played bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and then queen takes f6, this looks really strong because I've got two different mate in one threats. However, he has bishop takes g2 check, and after I take, he takes the rook. So I can take the bishop, but after rook takes a3, you can see that he's up the exchange, and I don't have the chance to play bishop takes e6, what I've arrowed over here. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate that. Bishop takes e6, he has rook e3 check, and the next move he plays rook takes e6. And I can play queen to h8 check, but it's just a one mover. It doesn't lead to anything. So white's position is hopeless here. All right. So after king to f8, though, the only thing I have to do is resist the temptation to take on f6. If I take on e6, though, this is very nice. Now I'm just simply winning. The advantage is a devastating one. So my rook is still protected by the bishop on c7. So bishop takes g2 is just meaningless. And I'm threatening rook takes f7 check, which certainly is no good news for him. And if he plays f takes e6 here, well, then I just have mate in 2, quite simply with this. So after rook to c7 check, king to f8 would not save the day. He played rook to d7. Right, well, now I swapped. And here, again, I could maybe play queen takes g3, but I thought that an even better move would be queen takes g7. And I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. So now I've got three things that I'm attacking. So I'm attacking the bishop still, but I'm also attacking the knight on f6, and I'm also attacking the pawn on f7. So this is really very, very convenient at this moment. Okay, so he played knight to d5, which is pretty logical. So he saves the knight, he plugs up the d file, and it has the kind of neat idea that if I play queen takes g3, he can either play queen takes e3, there we go, queen takes e3, or knight takes e3, and while I'm probably still winning in both cases, the position is becoming a bit messy. So I don't want him to have any threats of his own. So I want to have all the fun. So for that reason, I avoided queen takes g3, and I continued the attack. So I played queen takes f7, and now he's got some serious troubles. Well, he's had some serious troubles for a while, but I mean it's really coming to a head at this point. Dropping the knight back would be no good. If he plays knight to e7, I simply play rook to d1 check, or no, I don't play that. I could play it, but even simpler, just bishop takes e6 check is crushing. So I win his knight, because if he plays king to d8, queen f8's mate. So this is absolutely marvelous for me. So he plays king to d8 instead. All right, well, now I want to take his pawn on e6, but I want to take it with check. I mean, if I can take it with check, it's so much the better. Then everything collapses. So I played queen to f8, king d7, queen d6. So it's always good to keep an eye out for little finesses like that. That can make the difference between a win and a draw, or sometimes a very easy win and one that requires a lot of work. So always keep your eye out for little moves like that. Okay, well, now here if he plays king to c8, whoops, I'm sorry. If he plays king to c8, rook to c1 check is obviously devastating. So he plays king to e8. So he's still trying to hide behind what's remaining of his structure. I played queen takes e6 check. And now if he moves his king, let's say to f8, there are a lot of ways to win, but I probably would have just played the simple bishop takes d5. I'm pretty confident that I can win positions with exposed, when my opponent's king is exposed and I have 4 extra pawns. So this looks adequate to me. So for that reason, Cook rightly played knight to e7. I mean, if your king is in trouble and you've got other problems, you at least might as well keep all the material you can. Have something to compensate you for your suffering. Unfortunately, it's not enough. So I played queen to f7 check, king d7, now rook to d1 check, and here the end is near. If he plays king to c8, now I have the very pretty mate with bishop to e6. There's actually several mates. I could play queen to e6, and I could also play queen to e8. So that's also another mate. But I think this one's kind of pretty. So you have all of the relatively minor pieces doing the heavy lifting here. So the bishop's cut off the king on the diagonals, and the rook on d1 takes away the d8 square. Okay, so instead of that, Cook played king to c6. But after I played queen to c4 check, he resigned, because it's mate in 1. So if the queen interposes, I just take it with the queen, and that's mate. Or if king to b6, I've got a couple of mates, so I could play bishop to d4 mate, or I can play bishop to c7 mate, which probably would have been my choice. So anyway, either way, it's obviously an unhappy end for the black king, which never castled. So he went on lots of adventures, but castling wasn't one of them. And as you see, I mean, it wasn't that I was really going after his king per se, but that I saw that his bishop on h2 would be overextended. And it was a matter of trying to figure out, well, how do I take advantage of this? And in the process of taking advantage of it, I had as dessert or as a nice fringe benefit that there would be good chances to go after Black's king, and it paid off. So I think this presents kind of a different side of the equation from last week, but I hope one that supplements what we saw then. So I hope you enjoyed this game. Again, if you have some feedback and suggestions maybe for future topics, that would be great. You're more than welcome to leave that in the comment section. So again, thanks a lot, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.